Hey peeps,
Hey.
happy Valentine's.
Hello, happy Valentine's.
Thank you. Okay, um, let's get started. So today we are talking about the box model. So um, every element on a web page uh, is a box. It's not a circle. It's a box. Um, and what we'll be covering today is like how how those boxes get their size and a few other properties on the box that dictate its size. Um, and then like how the boxes decide to put themselves on the page. So uh, we're we're not going to be learning too much about positioning quite yet. Like you can have a lot more control over exactly something shows up on the page, which we'll learn about in our last lesson. Uh, what we're learning today is mainly like properties that will like sort of push different boxes away from other ones. Um, so yeah, let's hop in. We've got the box model today, then we're learning Flexbox, and then we're learning positioning, and that's like all the stuff you need to know in terms of how to put stuff on a web page. So let's hop to it. Okay, so first thing we want to get a web page started. Hold on, let me get my everyone's walking their dogs now, and so my dogs are nuts. Let me grab one of them and put it in this room. Second.
Excuse me.
Hey, sorry. Was there a question? Somebody said, excuse me, I think. Okay. Okay, so first thing we want to do is get a page going. So wherever you are, you'll make what kind of file? An index dot come on, people,
HTML.
participate. Yes, thank you.
Index.html.
Yeah, so I'm gonna get index.html. Interact. Interact, Cooper. You want to come in? Sorry. And then we want to do our CSS in a separate file. So we'll go ahead and make an index.css file. And people use index for like, there's like only going to be one file and it's like the main file. They'll name it index. You also see like main. So these are the only two files we'll have today. So that's why I named it that. But it could be any name we want. It could be in class.html or whatever. All right, so we've got our index.html, and then we want to set up our page. And I I have Copilot on still, so it's kind of filling this out for me, but that's okay. I'll turn it off in a second once we've got a structure going. So it added a head, it added a body, and then it added an H1 tag and then a list. So we'll get rid of that extra stuff. We'll keep the H1 and we'll keep the P tag. And then we've got our index CSS. So if I want to add a link to that index.css, where do I put the link and inside what tag?
The header or the head.
Yep. And then what's the tag name?
Style sheets rings a bell. I can't remember exactly what it is.
So
It's link space relationship or REL.
Yeah, so you see we got Copilot doing it for us here. So you can kind of see now that you've kind of learned some of this stuff, you can see like, oh wow, like it will guess a lot for me. So you can imagine why I forget a lot of these things sometimes. But so it filled out relation. So we do a link, do a relation style sheet. Last time I think someone misspelled style sheet, or it was just like style and it broke, remember? So it needs to be style sheet, and then /style CSS. That's not right, right? So what does this need to be for me to correctly link my index CSS file that's right there?
index.css.
Yeah, so we can do /index.css or just index.css, both are correct. All right, let me turn on Copilot. Okay. All right, so we got our index CSS linked. I'm going to put it to the side here. And can you guys see this okay?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, and then let's add a div here. Let's put some content there. And then let's put a class on here. We'll call this box1. Okay. And then over in our index CSS, I'm gonna write that class box1. So I'll do if I want to target a class, what's the thing that I type for that?
Dot and then the class name.
Box1 and then brackets. Okay, and then I'm going to add a few different properties to this. But to start, let's just give it a background color. So I'll do background color. Someone pick a color, please.
Pink for Valentine's Day.
Pink.
Good suggestion.
Good. I love it. Okay,
Like
and
you
then
say chartreuse.
yes. Okay, so now if we want to see this in the browser, start programming, we need to open live server. So I'll go live. And I wonder, I clicked go live. What's on that CSS file? So maybe that's why it didn't open it correctly. There we go. Usually, like if you have like the HTML file open that you want to go live with, then it'll jump straight to that page. But when I was on that CSS file, it seemed to not do that. So, okay. So we're open. We're going to open our dev tools. And okay, here too. All right, and now we can hover over stuff and hover over this here and interact with our div and kind of look at the different properties on it. So how big is this div? Or even when I say big, what properties am I talking about?
Do you mean that it's block?
100% width.
Yeah, what, so like, when I say big, I mean like, what's its height and width? Yeah. And yes, it's a block, it's a block level element, so its width is like taking up the full page, filling up the whole line, right? So I can, when I hover over it, it's telling me, you might not be able to see it, but it says 712.25 pixels by 18.38 pixels. And then if I have clicked on that element, I get this thing over here that shows, so first off, like, how do I make sure my CSS is working? Obviously it's pink, so we're good. But if it wasn't, you should always see all your properties reflected in this like side pop-up thing whenever you've clicked on it. So we can see background color pink is here coming from our index.css file. And then if you scroll down, you'll see the box model, which you like, so that's what you guys are learning about is the box model. And when we say box model, we mean there's a box, everything's a box on the page, and it has a width and a height. And then it has this sort of like stacking of stuff here, right? And so we've got this piece here, this 712 by 18 part of it. What do we call that?
Content.
The content. Good. Yeah. And the box is getting its size. Like, what is dictating the size of the box currently? Like
The
it's,
content.
yeah, good. So and that's sort of half true. So yes, the content, and then like our content, like
Font
some,
size.
well, yeah,
Does-
that's true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
font size would dictate the height.
Yes. But like, why is it so like it's super wide right now though, right? And the reason for that, like the reason it's 712 pixels wide, that's because it's a block, right? A block low element, so it's going all across. But the height is dictated by the content here. So it's sort of like the content and the type of element will dictate its width and height. And so if we add a bunch of content, like if we just copy this a bunch and look back at this, it continued to add content, to the right, and then eventually it reached the end of the page, and then it wrapped it to the next part. And so like now this box is bigger, not width-wise, but height-wise, because the content is dictating the size of the box. Good. So that's the content piece, which will be dynamic depending on the amount of content. Assuming what? Like, what could I do that would prevent the box from being the height that it is? So it's automatically choosing to be 36 height, and it's automatically choosing to be that width. But what can I do to change that?
Max height, max width.
So we can use that property, and then what's the other like more direct property that we can use? Besides, so there's max width, max height, min width, min height, and then what's the other? Just, and then there's just height and width. So you can also just directly set height and width, right? So I can go back to our box one, and I can say, hey, I want you to be width. And we got a few options here. We can do pixels, we can do rims. So I'll say, hey, let's do 500 pixels for the width, and let's do 500 pixels for the height. Okay. So now, actually, it feels too big because of how zoomed in I am. Okay. I don't know why, but this looks way taller than it looks wide to me personally. I don't know if anybody else is getting that vibe, but it says 250 by 250. Okay, so we can override that. Now, if we just keep adding more content, for example, let's actually make this smaller so it's a little bit easier to do that. Okay, so now I've done 100 by 100 pixels here. Okay, so the content doesn't fit in it anymore, right? So we said, hey, normally the content will dictate the height and the width in certain circumstances. But if I then manually set the width, whether that's min width or max width or width, and the same thing with height, then it has to be that size. We're dictating that the box will be that size, but the content may be much like it. The way that the content fits in there may make it do what. So in this case, we can see the content is, what do we call what's happening right now on the page?
Overflow.
Yeah, so the content's overflowing. And in this case, it's overflowing like not to the right, but just like straight down, basically. So does anybody know of like one way that we could prevent, or to know what property we can use to kind of dictate how we want our content to overflow?
Overflow X, overflow Y hidden. Or
Yes. So there's just an overflow property, which is, hey, if the content overflows for whatever reason, here's what I want you to do. And so a pretty cool one is you can say, hey, overflow, and then you can say like auto, for example, which it just is kind of picking like a default, which that default is to scroll. So you probably all have seen where like you've got scrolling on the whole page itself, but then there's something on the page that has scrolling within the element. And so that's what this is here. So if we want to, we can make these sort of scrolling elements within our page, which is very useful by setting overflow to auto. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead.
Thank you.
Okay, so by the way, if you're not trying to ask a question or anything, just make sure you're muted. Okay, so I had done that overflow like directly in the page, and then when I refreshed the page, it got rid of that manual setting that I did. So now we're back to this content being too big, but I'm going to get rid of some of that so that it's not overflowing. Actually, let's just get rid of it. So I'm going to put another div in here. So I'm going to put div class equals box 2. And I'm not going to put any content in it. And I'm going to make a new class here, box 2. And then I'm going to say background color. What other colors are there? Well, like red is like Valentine's Day, like a rose. See, brown. Let's go with red. So background color red, and then let's do. So we've got our box. I'm gonna make the width of it 150 pixels. Okay, like our parent box, and then I've got this second box inside that box. If I want that box to be like half the width and half the height of the parent box, how would I set that here. So I'm gonna set the width, but like what would I, if I want it to be half the size, what would I do?
75 pixels.
That would be correct, but if I ended up changing the parent to be 200 pixels and I wanted the child to still be half the size, what's like a way that I could
50%.
Yes, as a
50%.
percentage.
Yeah, very good. So we can do 50% for the width, we can do 50% for the height. And then if I want it to be centered, there's a cool trick with the margin property. Does anybody know that one?
Is it auto?
Yes, margin. Okay. I don't know if you can visually see what's going to be on the page without me showing it to you. So we got a parent box that's got a pink background with a width and a height of 150 pixels. And then we've got red box that's half the width and height of it, centered in the middle. So visualize that and make sure. And so is this what you expected when I did that? I was actually expecting it to be vertically center as well, but it's not doing that. So I was actually off on what I was expecting. I don't know what you were all expecting. But yes, so we can see we've got our box here, and then we've got our box inside of it. And then with our width, we're getting, if we scroll down to the box model here, we can see, okay, the whole box itself, that it's the child of is 150 pixels wide. And so that's 75. And then, so we got 150 and minus 75. And then the margin auto just puts equal margin on the left and the right of,
Did you remove the text that was in the first div?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that because if there's text in it, the red box won't pop up?
I did that just to kind of not have that hanging out, but
Yeah, it moves the box with the content.
Okay.
so our box is our inner box, right, is a block level, so it's always going to try to take up a whole line. So if there's something now like this by itself, so like this box wants to take up like a whole line, so it's going to push itself to the next line around this content here.
Yeah, the red box was not showing up for me.
Will you just paste your code in Slack? So like take your index.html and paste it in Slack, and then take your index.css and paste it in Slack. And there's mentors in the call that can take a look at it and can Slack you if they find something. And then one thing to double check is like whenever you click on the div, that should be in, like, so I assume that you see the first div box 1, and then inside of it you see the second div box 2, and then just make sure that the CSS is showing up here, and make sure you saved your files. That's usually a big common mistake. It's not saving the files. Okay, I'm gonna remove the content just to not have it there. All right, so far we've been dealing with width, height, and then just like content itself. If we want to use some of the other properties within the box model, what are some of the other ones that we have besides width and height?
Margin padding.
Yeah, it's like all right here, right? You can just cheat and just look right here. So here are the other properties: margin, border, padding. Notice that like you'll see like I'll talk about how there's like defaults, and like the browser will have a default. You can see those things by just like looking at like the HTML tag. Um, and seeing what's on there, and it'll say user agent style sheet on it, which is like the browser's baked in style sheet. And so if you look at body, for example, you can see that it's got margin of 8 pixels applied to it automatically by the browser style sheet. And so that's why, like, I mean, if you just looked at the HTML and the CSS that we wrote, you might be like, why is there this space between everything on the page? And that's because the body has margin, and we can hover over it and see that there's 8 pixels of margin being applied to the body. So everything within the page is getting shifted in by 8 pixels just by default. So you could change that if you wanted to. You could say, hey, I don't want that. No, thank you. And just do body margin. I want 0 pixels or something. And then now everything is like right up against the page, for example. And you can see that I've kind of overwritten the baked in style from the browser. Okay, so margin, padding, border. So let's add some of these to our box. We'll do it to the parent one first. So let's say, hey, let's have margin of 20 pixels. Let's have padding of 20 pixels. And then let's have a border. And this is kind of most of the time when you're defining a border, you want to define how big the border is, what type of border it is, and what color it is. It's pretty much always like those are the things you typically want to mention. And so you say, hey, I want a border of 1 pixel. So the first property is how big. What type of border? Solid is what I want. Just I want a solid line. And then what color you want, which I want black. So that's like the shorthand syntax for setting all 3 of those properties at once. It's the most common way that I see it typically. All right, so visualize in your head what you expect to see for the box now. And here it is. Here it is in all its glory. So now you can see we've got this. Let me get rid of this. We got this 1 pixel solid black border. We got rid of the margin on the like whole page, but we still have margin for this outer box here. And then now we've added some padding. So let's hover over this and we can kind of see the box model. So the orange around it is the margin, and then the green is the padding. And then we can't really see the border super well, so let me click on this real quick. Go to the box model down here. We can see margin 20. Then we can see the 1 pixel border. Then we can see that there's 20 pixels of padding. And then we can see that this content thing is 150 by 150. Okay, so the way that this is getting set up right now is with a certain type of certain way that we can dictate the ultimate width and height of the full element. There's like a default style, and then there's like a preferred style that most people override to. So we said box 1 should be 150 by 150. But then there's like the margin and the padding and the border. And so when we look at this, we can see, well, what's actually happening is the content of it is 150 by 150, which is the width and height that we set. And then it's adding 20 pixels of padding and a pixel of border and 20 pixels of margin around it. And there's like, does anybody know what style of display that is, like which setting that is. Okay, so there's two styles. Let me pull up this link here. So there's this box sizing property that we can set on the whole, most people set it on the whole page, basically. And so by default, the width and height of an element is width plus padding plus border. Will be the actual width and height of that. But there's a way that we can set that differently. So you can see, so here's the property, and we can set this on the whole page by doing box sizing is border box. And let me add that here so we can do like, hey, we want every element. We can do that with star to be box sizing border box. So take a look at the page currently so we can see, okay, hey, the box is 150 by 150, and then there's this padding and there's this border, and that's what's dictating the size of the whole, like the background, the pink background is the 150 plus the padding plus the border. But if we change it to box sizing border box, then what it does for us is it says, hey, I'll make sure that you're setting that you want this thing, this box, to be 150 by 150. So I will take care of, if you apply border and padding, I'll take care of like including that in the calculation of its size, and then like shrinking the content to ensure that your box will be that big. So now when we look at this box, it's 150 by 150, but you can see that it shrunk the content to not be 150 by 150 because of the padding in the border. And notice, so we've got 108 plus 20 plus 1 to get to our full 150. But those are on both sides. So you got 108 plus 20 plus 20 plus 1 plus 1, right? Okay. So most people prefer that style, because let me go back to this thing here. Like whenever you've got two divs here in this example. And they say, width is 300, heights 100 pixels, and border is this, and then you have like a second div and you've got this width 300, height 100, but then you set padding in a border. Well, with border box, you get both these divs being the same size, which is just a little bit, it's just easier to kind of think of it and reason that way. So most people prefer this. So we'll typically set, like most of the time when you're setting up your site, you'll always set box sizing to border box, just at the root like I did here. Okay, let's,
Can
yeah,
you
go ahead.
explain again why in the CSS file the body doesn't have the dot in front of it? Is it just a different kind of selector, or I just forgot that?
Yeah, so we've got dot selection, which is for classes, and then we've got hashtag selecting for what thing is that for?
ID.
Yeah, ID. So like, so far let me go ahead and make another one here. So I'll make another div. Say instead of class, I'll say ID. is box 3. So I haven't been reusing these class names so far. So I could have been using an ID this whole time. And so if I want to target box 3, I do hashtag box 3 instead. I can do, you know, background.
Okay, that makes sense.
Green. And with.
Is there a reason to prefer IDs over classes, or like, you know, vice versa?
Yeah.
Are they effectively the same thing?
Yeah, let me,
Okay.
well, no, sorry, let me answer that, but let me answer the first question real quick. So this is targeting an ID with the hashtag, the dot is targeting classes with the dot. And then if you just want to target an element, like just a tag name, then you just don't put anything before it. So this is saying, hey, find the tag body and change that. I could also say, hey, find the tag P, like find paragraphs, and change the font size to 30 pixels, for example. So now, you know, I can have more than one P tag on this page. And I can change the font size for all P tags. So yeah, so now we can see, hey, you know, here's this P tag, its font size is 30, and then here's this other P tag whose font size is also 30. So yeah, the lack of a dot or hashtag is just because we want to do a different selection type. It's a different selector. So it's an element selector instead of like a class selector.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. And then the other question is, why would we use ID versus class? So we'll use class when we want to reuse our styling. And so I might say, hey, you know what? Like I'm building something and I have this element that repeats and it's box. Like it's just, I would probably just call it box, or I'd call it some kind of specific thing. Like I might have like a recipe site. And so I might have like a recipe card that has like the picture and then some of the initial descriptions of like what type of food and what diet and how long it takes to cook it, right? And then the picture. And so I might say, hey, I'm going to make a class called recipe card to apply the styling I need to make that card. So I'm just going to call mine box though. So for that, we might say, hey, I've got something where I want the width to be 100 pixels. And I want the height to be 150 pixels. And then I want the background color to be like a nice kind of gray color maybe. And then I want a border 1 pixel solid black or whatever. So I don't actually have that box on here yet, but let me add it. So I'll do div class equals box recipe card. Okay, so now we can find our recipe card here. Not the best looking recipe card. But you know, maybe that's all the styling. Like we do a bunch of styling for the card. And that's, you know, we get it to look really good. So if I want to reuse that, because I'm gonna have more than one recipe, so this might be soup. And then we've got another recipe that's like tomato soup. We'd want to reuse that class box for that other recipe. So now we've got corn soup and tomato soup. Okay, when it's ID, so you won't typically, like there's no reason that you couldn't make everything a class and then just only reuse it once. So like there's nothing about the ID that is like fundamental to you could get away without ever using an ID. It just makes a lot more sense. Because like I have this box one that's a class, right? And I wrote box one and I applied it to that one div. And if I never applied it to anything else, then that's fine. It would only be applied to that one thing, and it's basically effectively an ID. Um, and so like using an ID in CSS isn't like strictly necessary. We use ID in HTML um, a lot to like identify particular things on the page so that we can target them specifically. Like there's certain times where like like when you're on a form and you've got like a username and password, like you want to probably put ID username, ID password for that element so that your code can like find it and do something with it. So we'll use an ID a lot more with JavaScript because we'll want to be able to like interact with very specific pieces of the page that have specific functionality.
Okay, awesome. Thanks. Like functionally, it sounds like they're the exact same as, the ID, like having a separate ID is, like a quality of life improvement. Is that
Yeah.
a fair statement? You could like functionally they're the same, but
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
if I change box one from class box one to ID box one and then go over here and change this to that, still works like it's still applying those styles exactly the same way. I just then technically it would work, but I technically am not allowed to have a second box with that same ID. But it'll work still. It'll just get mad at me, I think, is you'll just see like it's not even getting mad at me. Like you're just not supposed to do that. But you can see like I've got two of them on the page and they're both getting styled exactly the same. It's just like technically it's not correct. And like if you were writing JavaScript is when it would get madder because if you were trying to find that box with your code, then it would just only find the first one and it wouldn't find the second one. And it would just be confusing. So yeah, you just shouldn't have anything in your HTML with the same ID twice. But like when it comes to CSS, it's gonna apply the style the same.
thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so on this sort of recipe card thing, like if I want to kind of like so let's say I actually wanted to make like a recipe setup, like you know how you on a web page you'll see like like I was showing Pitchfork, we've got like reviews and it's like laid out like this, Uh, like if I want to kind of clean up the spacing between these two, like the corn soup here is like running right into my tomato soup. So like what's one thing I could do to kind of get the spacing between these to be a little better?
BR.
Yeah, so yes, so we can do BR. Everyone, if you use BR, people are gonna tell you not to do it. It's like it's sort of just like 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 if you just like search should I use BR, you're gonna get like a bunch of rants from people. And you'll see like I don't know if I've actually even talked to you guys about Stack Overflow, but Stack Overflow is like if you're searching something, Stack Overflow is like the coders like Stack Exchange or like Quora, like people ask questions and then people will answer them and then they get voted on and stuff. And so this used to be like the main way that you would Google search something and find an answer. Nowadays, you'll probably just use ChatGPT. So like you would go like, is it bad to use BR in HTML? So here we go. So like I was asking, hey, I want to like I want to have a space between my recipes. So I'm like concerned with the layout and the spacing of things. And so you can see here, it's like, hey, like for spacing and layouts, overusing BR for creating space between elements is not recommended. CSS should be used instead so that you just basically have more control. Like a break is like the size it is. And so if you really want fine control over exactly how much space there is, it's better to use what property would be better to use
Margin.
to create this same gap here without a BR
Margin.
margin. And if I only want the gap to be right here, what do I like? Which margin property is that?
Margin top.
Bottom.
Yes, great. So actually, I was going for bottom, but top would work as well. So like I'm applying this to I'm gonna apply it to the recipe card. Or actually I call it box. But I can do so for box, I can say, hey, let me get rid of this break here. Well, actually, let's take a look at break real quick. So when we look at break here, wow, I was expecting it to give me like a size, but it's not even telling me. It's just saying auto. That's interesting. But we can see it's 18.38 pixels. I'm not even sure why it's getting that size. So that's interesting. But yeah, if we go back and add margin top to this and do 10, well, let's do 20 pixels. And scroll back down. So now we've got a margin top that's showing up here and here, which is totally fine. I could have also done margin bottom, right? So let's go ahead and let's just add margin bottom to this as well. Cooper, it's not dinner time yet. Hey, it's hey, give me a minute. Okay, so I added margin top and margin bottom to these recipe cards. Okay, and if we look here, the space between these, see here, I've got margin top on this box. And if we look at the box model, we've got this margin top, right? And if you can see on the left, it's showing me that 20 there. But then if I go to this box here, we also have margin bottom and margin top, right? And if I look at the margin bottom, it's showing me those 20 pixels there as well. So we have margin top and margin bottom, right? So this tomato soup has margin top of 20 pixels. This corn soup has margin bottom of 20 pixels. So you might think like, hey, that should be 40 pixels, right, of margin between these two. But does anybody know what this is called when they're combined?
Is it just overlapping?
So what this is called is collapsing of the margin. So in certain scenarios, you will like basically get the largest of whatever margin there is. So if I ask for margin top of 40 pixels and then only 20 pixels of margin bottom, then does anybody know what the gap would be here? So if margin top is 40 of tomato soup and margin bottom is 20 of corn soup, how much space will be here?
40.
40, yeah. So it's gonna collapse and just pick whichever one's bigger. So if we go back to this and say, hey, margin top should be 40 pixels, now we've got 40 pixels of space. Okay. All right, so we've got this nice sort of margin between these now. I'm gonna refresh this so we're back to 20 pixels. If I want to kind of get some space on the left here, what could I do? Like, so I don't like that this is like right up against this thing. This like border here is right up against the web page. I want it to be a little bit to the right. So what are some options for doing that? There's quite a few. Go
Yeah.
ahead, sorry.
I was just gonna say, we'll remove the margin 0 pixels and it won't be right up against the edge anymore.
Good, okay. So yeah, we used to have 8 pixels of margin on the whole page, right? Or so let's say you can't do that. So for some whatever reason, you're not able to change that. What's another option that I could do?
Could you use padding?
So I could use padding on the whole thing. That's true. So I could go back to the body and our margin's not there anymore, but I could add padding, yeah. Back to, 8 pixels. Which is like effectively the same thing in this case. All right, let's say that's not an option.
You can specify what size you want the margin. Like just change it.
Yeah, so besides applying margin to like the whole body of the whole page, if I want like just these recipe cards to not be so close to the edge here, what could I do?
You could do left margin auto, right margin auto.
Yeah, sorry. So let's say I want like 10 pixels, for example. So I can go back to our box and then add margin left of 10 pixels or whatever, right? So now, oh, I spelled that wrong, margin. So now both our recipe cards are kind of moved 10 pixels on the left from whatever's there. And in this case, the only thing there is just the whole page itself. So it moves itself to the right. Now, if I wanted to do this same thing, but with padding, and I don't want to do the padding to the whole root of the page, what would I have to do to get this same effect? This one might be kind of tricky.
Couldn't
But
you
like,
do the same thing like padding left and padding right?
okay, yeah, so padding left on box.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So padding left 20 pixels. So when I do this, notice it didn't, the whole thing itself didn't move. It stayed where it was. And it's the same width still. Like the recipe, or I should change the name to recipe, but this box is still how big do I mean? 100 pixels wide, and it's not any further from the left anyway. Like when we do padding, that's only going to change the inside of our box. And so we added 8 pixels of padding, or we added 20 pixels of padding on the left of the recipe box, but that only moved the content inside the box further in. So the sort of tricky answer to the question I was asking is we can use padding to move these boxes in the same way, but it would have to be with a wrapping parent elements padding. So to do what I described, we would say, okay, here's our recipes here. So maybe I'm trying to build this page. So I've got I'm gonna go ahead and change these now. So we'll say recipe item is what we've been doing so far for box. But then I might have like a wrapping div to both like all of our recipes, right? We'll go inside here and I'll do a class on these called like recipes, for example. So this is like the tag that's going to hold all the recipes. And I'll add that class here, recipes. And I could say, hey, for this, let's do padding 8 pixels. And then I can get rid of this margin left and this padding left on the recipe item. And we're back to the same spot here. So now I've got this whole like sort of wrapping recipes container that has padding 8 all around it, just to kind of keep the content in a little bit. And then I've got my recipe items here. Okay. Yeah, so margin is used to kind of move yourself away from other things. So it's about like pushing things away from you. Padding is about pushing the content of you in a certain way. And then the border is just the border. That one's pretty easy. Okay, so everything has been a box so far, which maybe is frustrating. Like there's boxes everywhere, but surely you've used websites where you've had like a button, for example. So let's do a button here. Say click me. And we'll, we've got this button that just showed up. Let's be a little more specific. So let's say, hey, here's, in this case, I might say, let's use an ID. So this might be like, submit, or like buy item. Like maybe this is like you're on a checkout screen and you want to check out or purchase something. So I'm gonna go add that ID here, buy item, and let's make it with, let's say 150 pixels. Height would be maybe 70 pixels. It's a huge button, but that's because like we're so zoomed in that like I'm way thrown off on my pixel sizes here. But let me zoom back in. All right, so there's our big button. I'm gonna make it just a bit smaller though. So 50, 30. Okay, so there's the button, and it's a box button, and it's okay. I don't love it, but if we can make stuff rounded, so if we wanted to make this look better, we can make it have like you can make it round. Does anybody know the property we use to make our boxes round?
Border radius.
Yeah, good. So we can say for buy item, that button, we'll make the border radius, and we'll set this to something in pixels. So we can say like 20 pixels or something. And then see that, okay, yeah, now we got this cool rounded button here. And we could say, we want the border to be 1 pixel solid black. And get that kind of nice thing. And then you're probably used to buttons, having all this sort of fancy stuff happening where like when you hover over it, it changes colors. And then when you click on it, it like, like feels like you're clicking on it. And then you also like feel like there's maybe some like 3D nature to it. So like there's this design framework called Material. I don't know if any of you heard that. Google made Material Design. And when we get to React, we'll use this component library that has all these buttons for us. And so you can see like this button here, for example, like when you hover over it, you get this sort of hover state. And notice that, you know, it's got this slight Cooper. It's got this slight like border radius to make it not exactly square. It's like slightly rounded. And then notice it also has this like 3D feel to it. And that's what this simple property called border or border shadow. So you can set like, hey, I want a certain amount of shadow for my element. And that's all you need to do to make a, and then you would just have different styling for the hover state, right? So we'd use our pseudo selector to change the hover state color. And that's all it takes to kind of make fancy buttons that kind of look like what you're used to when you're interacting with more advanced web apps and stuff. Cool. I think that's everything for today. We're already 2 minutes over, so I'm sorry. I will post homework, but we are on Saturday, we'll be going over Flexbox. So that's like the thing I'm required. That's the thing I've kind of alluded to a few times that makes positioning stuff on the page really easily, and then handling like dynamic web pages like sizes as well. So that should be a fun day. All right, thanks everybody. Have a good. Sorry if I'm between you and your hubby or your girlfriend or whatever. Enjoy your Valentine's Day. Bye.
You too. See you guys.